Nathaniel Brooks pressed his forehead against the wooden doorframe of his children's bedroom and did something he had not done since the day they buried his wife. He wept, not quietly, not with dignity. He wept with his whole body, shoulders shaking, hands gripping the frame until his knuckles went white, mouth pressed shut to keep the sound from reaching the children. Because if they heard their father falling apart, they might stop fighting. And right now, fighting was the only thing keeping them in this world. Clara was 8 years old. Samuel had just turned 6 in April. And for 3 days, fever had been eating them alive. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart, please take just 1 second and hit that subscribe button right now. Every single week I bring you stories just like this one. Stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength in the moments that mattered most. And I read every single comment. So drop your city down below, tell me where you're watching from tonight, because I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that farmhouse door, because what happened next on that stormy Wyoming night is something I will never forget telling. The summer of 1882 did not arrive gently in Cedar Hollow, Wyoming. It came hard and dry and mean, the way summers sometimes do in ranching country, burning the grass yellow by June, cracking the creek beds by July, and squeezing every last drop of mercy out of the land before August even arrived. The farmers and ranchers in that valley had learned to expect hardship. They had built their lives around it. They knew how to survive drought, and failed crops, and broken equipment, and the particular loneliness that comes from living miles from your nearest neighbor with nothing but wind and distance for company. What they did not know how to survive was the kind of fever that came for children. It arrived without warning, the way the worst things always do. One evening Clara came in from the yard quieter than usual, not running the way she always ran, not calling out for her father the way she always called. She walked slowly to the table and sat down, and when Nathaniel looked at her, he saw it immediately: the glassy eyes, the flushed cheeks, the way her small hands lay flat against the table, like she was too tired to even hold them up. "Clara," he said, moving toward her, "you feelin' all right, sweetheart?" She shook her head, just once slow. He put his hand to her forehead and felt his stomach drop. She was burning. By morning Samuel had it too. Nathaniel had spent the first day telling himself it would pass. Children got fevers. Children recovered from fevers. He had seen it happen. He told himself to be calm, to be steady, to be the father his children needed him to be. He brought cold water and changed the cloths on their foreheads every hour. He sat between their 2 beds in the old wooden chair that creaked every time he shifted, and he talked to them softly, told them stories, sang the songs their mother used to sing when she was still alive and the house still felt full. He told himself, this will pass. By tomorrow they will be better. But they were not better by tomorrow, and they were not better the day after that. By the 3rd day, something had shifted in the house. The air itself felt different, heavier, thicker, as if the farmhouse had begun holding its breath. Clara had stopped responding to his stories. She lay with her eyes half open, staring at the ceiling, breathing in a way that frightened him more than anything he had ever heard. Short, shallow, labored breaths that never seemed to quite fill her lungs. Samuel had gone even quieter. The little boy who normally could not sit still for 5 minutes, who climbed everything and questioned everything and made noise constantly, just because silence seemed to offend him, that boy was now still and small and pale against his pillow. And the stillness scared Nathaniel more than any storm ever had. Nathaniel had ridden hard to Cedar Hollow the morning of the 2nd day, pushing his horse faster than he should have, to find the only doctor in the valley. Dr. Hargrove was a lean, gray-haired man in his 60s who had seen his share of illness and who did not waste words on false comfort. He examined both children, took his time, and when he finished he stood in the hallway and spoke quietly so the children would not hear. "Dr. Brooks," he said, "this fever is serious. I won't pretend otherwise." "Tell me what to do," Nathaniel said. "Give me something." "Whatever you have." Hargrove had given him medicines, powders mostly, mixed into water, and instructions for keeping the children cool and hydrated. He had spoken about the importance of rest, about watching for certain signs, about sending for him immediately if things changed for the worse. And then he had climbed back onto his horse and ridden back toward town, because there were 3 other families waiting for him across the valley, and he was one man with only so many hours in a day. Nathaniel followed every instruction exactly. He measured the medicines carefully. He changed the cooling cloths. He kept a careful watch through the night. He prayed in the way a man prays when he has run out of every other option, not eloquently, not with carefully chosen words, but desperately, bargaining and pleading, and making promises he would spend the rest of his life trying to keep. The medicines did not break the fever just kept burning. And now it was the 3rd night, and a storm had come in from the northwest, shaking the old farmhouse with wind and hammering the roof with rain. And Nathaniel was standing in the doorway of his children's room, with his forehead pressed against the wood and tears running down his face. He was 38 years old. He had survived a great deal in those 38 years. He had lost his father young and worked his first ranch job at 15 to help keep his mother and siblings fed. He had fought through 2 brutal winters in Montana before he found his way to Wyoming and built something of his own. He had lost his wife, Mary, to illness 2 years ago, and he had survived that too barely, and not without cost, but he had survived it because he had to. Because Clara and Samuel needed him to, but this was different. This was his children, and for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Brooks did not know what to do. He had no more options. He had followed every instruction. He had used every remedy he could find written in his mother's old notes. He had prayed until the words felt hollow. He had sat beside those beds for 3 days and watched the fever refuse to break, watched his children get smaller and quieter and further away, and he did not know what came next. He did not know what a man does when he has already done everything, and it isn't enough. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He didn't know exactly who he was speaking to. Maybe to Mary, somewhere in whatever came after. Maybe to his children. Maybe to himself. "I don't know how to fix this, and I'm sorry." The knock at the door came so quietly that for a moment Nathaniel thought he had imagined it. He straightened up and stood still, listening. The storm was loud enough that it could have been anything, a branch against the porch, something blown loose by the wind. He waited. The knock came again, 3 quiet taps. Patient, unhurried. Nathaniel walked to the front door, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and pulled it open. Evelyn Marlowe was standing on his porch. She was soaked through her dark coat, dark with rain, her hair wet and plastered against her face, the small basket she carried dripping from the bottom edge. She had clearly walked through the storm to get here, not ridden, and the mud on her boots told him she had come across the open field between their properties rather than taking the longer path around. She had come the fastest way possible. She was holding the basket against her chest and looking at him with calm, steady eyes that somehow contained no apology for showing up unannounced at this hour, in this weather. Nathaniel stared at her. He knew Evelyn Marlowe the way everyone in Cedar Hollow knew her, which was to say he knew almost nothing about her at all. She had come to the valley about 4 years ago, purchased the neighboring farm, and proceeded to work it quietly and competently, and almost completely alone. She came into town for supplies and not much else. She did not attend socials. She did not join the church ladies' quilting circle or the harvest suppers, or any of the other gatherings that passed for community out here. She was polite when spoken to, but she rarely initiated conversation, and she had a way of ending interactions without being rude that people in Cedar Hollow had interpreted as coldness. They called her strange, standoffish, proud. Nathaniel had never thought those words fit her exactly. He had watched her, from a distance, the way you watch a neighbor without meaning to notice, the careful way she tended her property, the long hours she kept. The way she moved through her days with a kind of quiet efficiency that suggested someone who had learned not to waste time or energy on anything that didn't matter. He had thought she seemed private more than cold, careful more than proud. But they had never exchanged more than a handful of sentences in 4 years. And she was standing on his porch in the middle of a storm at nearly midnight. "Miss Marlowe," he said, and then stopped because he didn't know what else to say. "I heard your children are sick," she said. Her voice was low and even. She did not speak loudly, but there was something in the quality of it that made it easy to hear even over the rain. "I've been watching the light in your house, 3 days without it going out, not once, not even for an hour." He hadn't thought about that. He hadn't thought about what it might look like from the outside, the constant lamplight burning through the windows, while the rest of the valley went dark for the night. "I have things that might help," Evelyn said. She shifted the basket slightly and held his gaze directly. "I'm not promising miracles, Mr. Brooks. I want to be clear about that. But I know some things about fever I grew up learning. And I'd like to try if you'll let me." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. In the doorway behind him, he could hear Clara's labored breathing from the bedroom down the hall. He stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. Evelyn moved through the farmhouse without hesitation, following the sound of the children's breathing, with the instinctive navigation of someone who had done this before. She did not pause to look around, did not take in the details of the house the way a curious visitor might. She went straight to the bedroom, set her basket on the dresser, and bent over each child in turn, her hands moving over their foreheads, their throats, their wrists, her ear tilting toward their chests, to listen to the quality of their breathing. Nathaniel stood in the doorway and watched her, feeling something strange and unfamiliar rising in his chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but something adjacent to it. "How long has the smaller one been breathing like this?" she asked without looking up. "Since this afternoon," Nathaniel said. "It changed around 4 o'clock. Dr. Hargrove came yesterday. He left medicines." "What medicines?" he told her. She listened carefully, nodding once or twice. "You've been giving them correctly?" "Exactly as he said." She was quiet for a moment, still watching Samuel's chest rise and fall. Then she reached into her basket and began setting things out on the dresser, small cloth pouches, a sealed jar, a bundle of dried plant material that Nathaniel did not recognize, a clean cloth folded into quarters. "My mother treated fever in communities where the nearest doctor was sometimes 4 days away," Evelyn said as she worked, her voice still that same low, even tone. She learned from the women who had been doing it before doctors existed in those places. Some of what she knew sounds strange. Some of it, she paused, pressing her lips together, briefly works. "I've seen it work. What do you need from me?" Nathaniel asked. She told him. For the next 2 hours, Nathaniel did exactly what Evelyn said without question or argument, something he would later reflect on as the moment he decided to trust her completely. He boiled water when she asked for it. He brought clean linens. He held Samuel upright when Evelyn needed both her hands free to work. He sat close to Clara and talked to her quietly, without stopping, the way Evelyn instructed, because she said the sound of a familiar voice could be a kind of anchor for a person whose body was fighting hard. "Keep talking to her," Evelyn said. "Don't stop. What do I say?" "Anything, everything. What she means to you, what you're going to do together when she's well. What you had for breakfast the morning she was born. It doesn't matter what, just keep her connected to your voice." Nathaniel talked. He talked about the morning Clara was born, how he had been so nervous he'd knocked over a lantern in the barn and frightened all the horses. He talked about the first time Samuel had said a real word, how it had been more, and how he had been reaching for a biscuit when he said it, which Nathaniel said told you everything you needed to know about Samuel's priorities. He talked about Mary, carefully, choosing the memories that were warm rather than painful, the way she used to hum while she cooked, the way she laughed with her whole face. At some point he realized he was crying again, quietly this time, not with the wrenching despair from earlier, but with something more complicated, grief and hope tangled up together in a way that hurt differently than either one alone. Evelyn moved around him with calm efficiency, not intruding on the private things he was saying, giving him and his children the space to be a family while she worked. Around 1 in the morning, she paused beside him. "You should eat something," she said. "You haven't eaten, it wasn't a question." "I'm fine," he said. "You won't be fine if you collapse," she said, not unkindly. "There's still a long way to go tonight. I need you functional." She spoke practically, the way someone speaks when sentiment would be less useful than directness. Nathaniel appreciated it more than he could say. He went to the kitchen and stood in the dim lamplight and ate some bread and cold meat that tasted like nothing, his ears straining toward the sounds from the bedroom down the hall. And when he walked back, he found Evelyn sitting on a wooden stool beside Samuel's bed, with the boy's wrist loose in her hand, counting his pulse against the rhythm of her own breathing. She looked up when Nathaniel came back. "Sit with Clara," she said. "Hold her hand." He did. The hours stretched out long and strange in the way that hours do when you are waiting for something you cannot rush. The storm outside did not quiet. The rain kept coming, hitting the windows in long sweeping gusts, and the wind found every gap and crack in the old farmhouse walls and moved through them in low murmurs that sounded almost like voices. Nathaniel kept talking to Clara. He ran out of stories after a while and switched to just telling her plainly how much she mattered to him. How much the world needed her in it. How empty the mornings would be without the sound of her feet hitting the floor. How he had never once, not for a single day since she was born, woken up without being grateful. "You come back to me, sweetheart," he said, his voice rough and quiet. "You hear me? You come back." Clara did not respond. But her breathing did not get worse. Just past 2 in the morning, everything changed. Samuel had been the quieter of the two all evening, lying still in a way that worried Nathaniel more than any amount of noise could have. But then, without any warning that Nathaniel could see, something shifted. Samuel's breathing changed, sharpened, grew faster, took on a strained quality that was different from the shallow rhythm of before. Nathaniel stood up so fast the chair scraped back against the floor. "Something's wrong," he said. "Something's happening." "I see it." Evelyn was already beside Samuel, her hand on his chest. "He's fighting harder now. His body is working. That's good." Nathaniel's voice came out too high, not the voice of a steady man. "That means it's good?" Evelyn looked at him over her shoulder. Her expression was serious but not afraid, and he grabbed onto that distinction with both hands. "It means something is happening," she said carefully. "Stay with him. Talk to him the way you were talking to Clara." "Evelyn." He said her name without thinking, without the formality, and she didn't correct him. "Tell me honestly, is he talk to him, Nathaniel?" Her voice was firm. An anchor, a command given not with harshness but with total certainty. "Right now, your voice is the most important thing in this room. Use it." He knelt beside Samuel's bed. He took his son's small hand between both of his. "Hey, buddy," he said. His voice broke on the second word and he forced it back together. "Hey, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? I'm right here." He felt Evelyn move behind him, heard the quiet sounds of her working, and he focused everything he had on the boy in front of him. "You remember what we're going to do in the fall?" he said. "We talked about it, remember? I said I'd teach you to fish the South Creek. The good part, not the shallow part, where the big ones are. You said you wanted to catch one bigger than your arm. You remember that?" Samuel's breathing rattled and strained. Nathaniel kept talking. He talked about fishing. He talked about the horse Samuel had named Captain, despite the horse being neither impressive nor commanding. He talked about Christmas, which was 5 months away, and he made up details about things he was going to find in town because he needed Samuel to have things to look forward to, things to stay for. "You can't leave me yet," he said, very quietly, right up against his son's ear. "I still need you, son. I know a man's not supposed to say that. I know that's not how it's done, but I need you. You and your sister are everything I've got, so you've got to stay. You've got to fight. Can you do that? Can you fight for me?" He stayed like that for what felt like a very long time. Then slowly Samuel's breathing began to even out. Still labored, still not right, but different, the sharp, strained quality fading, replaced by something steadier. Nathaniel lifted his head and looked at Evelyn, who was watching Samuel with careful attention. He's still in it," she said, but that was the crisis. The worst of it. She paused, and then she said something that cracked him open completely. "You didn't leave him." The words were simple. She said them matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. but they hit Nathaniel somewhere deep and fundamental, somewhere he hadn't known was raw. He sat back from the bed and put his hands over his face. "I don't know how to do this," he said. It came out, muffled, broken, the admission he had been holding back for 3 days. "I don't know how to do it alone. I've been telling myself I can, telling myself I have to, because there's nobody else, but I don't know. I don't know how to carry all of it." He heard the small sound of Evelyn setting something down. He heard her move, and then she said, from very close by quietly, "You're not carrying it alone tonight." He didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say, but something in him that had been clenched tight for 3 days, maybe longer, maybe for 2 years, maybe for longer than he wanted to admit, loosened fractionally. Not all the way, but enough. They sat in silence for a while after that, both of them keeping watch, the storm still moving across the valley outside. "Somewhere around 4 in the morning, Evelyn said, "the children's breathing has steadied." Both of them. Nathaniel looked up. She was right. The room sounded different, less strained, less labored. Clara had stopped the shallow, rapid breathing that had been frightening him for hours. Samuel's chest was rising and falling in a rhythm that still wasn't easy, but was no longer desperate. "The fever hasn't broken yet," Evelyn said, "but the worst has passed." "I believe the worst has passed." Nathaniel let out a long, slow breath. He had not realized how much he had been holding it. The two of them waited together as the storm outside gradually quieted, the rain softening from a roar to a murmur to a gentle tapping against the glass. The darkness in the windows began to thin, almost imperceptibly at first, and then with more confidence, the black giving way to deep blue, the deep blue to gray, the gray beginning to hold the first pale suggestion of light. Dawn was coming. Nathaniel had not slept in 3 days, and he was aware of it now in every joint and muscle of his body, a bone-deep exhaustion that had been waiting patiently behind the fear for its turn to be felt. But he didn't move from his chair. He was watching his children breathe. He was watching them breathe, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. He was still watching them when Clara's eyes opened. It happened slowly, her lids fluttering, heavy, as if pushing through something thick and resistant. He saw it before she said anything, the moment of waking, the moment of returning. And then her eyes found his across the dim room, and she said, in a voice that was small and rough and more wonderful than anything he had ever heard, "Papa, Nathaniel Brooks, widowed rancher, 38 years old, man who had survived more hardship than most, could not speak." He got up from his chair. He moved to Clara's bed, and he sat on the edge of it, and he took his daughter's hand, and he held it against his chest, and he pressed his face into her hair, and he shook with something that was not quite crying, and not quite laughing, but was somewhere in between, somewhere past the reach of any word he knew. "Hey," he finally managed. "Hey, sweetheart, there you are." "There you are. My head hurts," she said. He let out a sound that was almost a laugh. "I know, that's okay. That's all right. Is Sammy okay?" "He's going to be fine." He said it because it was true. He could feel that it was true, could feel it in the changed quality of the room, in the changed quality of the air. "He's going to be just fine." Behind him he heard Evelyn setting down her supplies. He heard the quiet, careful sounds of a woman who was deliberately giving a father and daughter their private moment, making herself small and unobtrusive in the background. He turned and looked at her. She was standing by the dresser with her back half-turned, folding a cloth with precise, efficient movements. Her hair had dried but was still disordered from the storm. Her coat was draped over the chair. She looked tired for the first time that night. She actually looked tired, the composure showing its cost in the lines around her eyes and the set of her shoulders. She must have felt his gaze because she looked up. He didn't have words for what he wanted to say. He wasn't sure he would ever have the right words for it. So he just looked at her, and let her see what was on his face, which was everything, every ounce of relief and gratitude and something else he couldn't name yet, something that would take longer to understand. Evelyn Marlowe looked back at him for a moment. Then she turned back to her folding and said very quietly, "The fever should break fully by mid-morning. Keep giving them water. Small amounts often. Don't let them eat yet." She paused. "I'll stay until I'm sure." "Thank you," he said. The words felt completely insufficient. She nodded once, briskly, the way you acknowledge something when sentiment would embarrass everyone. Outside, through the farmhouse windows, the sky was turning gold. The storm was over, the children were still here. And the quiet woman who had walked through the rain, with a basket of herbs and a heart full of things she never talked about, was standing in Nathaniel Brooks's farmhouse, as the morning came in, as if she had always belonged there. As if she had been coming toward this place, through all her quiet, careful years, without knowing it. As if some things, the most important things, find their way to where they need to be. Not with noise, not with ceremony, but through a storm, in the dark, with steady hands and a voice that says, "Stay, I'm here, let someone help you carry it." Samuel's fever broke at 9:30 in the morning. Not dramatically, not with any single visible moment that Nathaniel could point to afterward and say there, that was the exact second everything changed. It happened the way good things sometimes happen after a long fight, gradually, quietly, and then all at once. 1 minute Samuel was lying there with the same pale, waxen look he'd had for 3 days, and then the next time Nathaniel pressed the back of his hand to his son's forehead, something was different. The skin was still warm, but the burning, that particular terrifying heat that had felt less like fever and more like something consuming the boy from the inside out, was retreating. Nathaniel stood very still with his hand on Samuel's forehead and did not move for almost a full minute. Then he said in a voice that came out broken and strange, "Evelyn." She was in the kitchen. She had been there for the last hour. He had heard her moving around, the quiet sounds of water and the small clinking of cups, and he had understood that she was giving him time alone with his children, while also, in her characteristically efficient way, refusing to actually leave until she was certain they were safe. She appeared in the bedroom doorway almost immediately, which told him she had not gone far. "The fever," he said. He could not finish the sentence. He just looked at her with his hand still pressed to Samuel's forehead. Evelyn crossed the room in a few quick steps and placed her own hand next to his, her fingers resting lightly against Samuel's temple. She was quiet for a moment, checking, feeling, the same concentrated attention she had brought to everything she did in this house through the long night. Then she exhaled. It was a small sound, controlled. But Nathaniel heard everything in it, the hours of tension releasing, the sustained vigilance finally given permission to ease. It was the first truly unguarded sound he had heard her make. "Yes," she said, "it's breaking." And Nathaniel sat down on the edge of his son's bed and put his face in his hands. He was not crying this time. He was just done holding everything up by sheer force. The way a man who has been pressing his shoulder against a collapsing wall finally steps back when someone else takes the weight. He sat there with his face hidden and breathed, and for a few seconds neither of them spoke. "Samuel's going to need water when he wakes," Evelyn said, practical and gentle at the same time, giving him something to do, which he suspected was intentional. "Small amounts. Don't let him drink fast even if he wants to." Nathaniel lifted his head. He nodded. He looked at his son, really looked at him, in the morning light, with the crisis finally past, and something moved through him that he did not have a name for. It was too large for relief, too quiet for joy. It was more like standing at the edge of something vast and realizing how close you had come to falling in, and feeling the solid ground under your feet for the first time. "You should sleep," Evelyn said. She was watching him with that same steady directness she brought to everything. "Both children are past the worst. I'll watch them for a few hours." "I'm not leaving them, Nathaniel." She used his name the same way he had used hers in the dark hours of the night, without thinking, without the careful distance that names could provide. "You haven't slept in 3 days. You're not helping them by running yourself into the ground. Sit in the chair at least. Close your eyes," he wanted to argue. He looked at her face and found no room for argument in it, not because she was demanding, but because she was simply right and they both knew it. He sat back in the chair beside Samuel's bed and closed his eyes. He was asleep in under a minute. He woke to the sound of his son's voice. Not frightened, not in pain, just Samuel's voice, the ordinary everyday voice of a 6-year-old boy who had opinions about things and did not hesitate to express them. I'm hungry, Samuel was saying. I'm really hungry. My stomach feels like it's eating itself. Nathaniel opened his eyes. Samuel was awake, propped against his pillow, and looking across the room with an expression of profound and somewhat indignant grievance directed at Evelyn, who was sitting in the wooden stool beside him with a cup of water and an expression that might, if you looked carefully, have contained the very beginning of a smile. Not yet, she was saying calmly. Water first, food later. But I feel fine, Samuel protested. I feel completely fine. My stomach disagrees. Your stomach will survive a little longer. I want biscuits, I imagine you do, with the brown sugar on top. Papa makes them with the brown sugar. I'll tell him. Nathaniel became aware that he was smiling. He became aware that he could not remember the last time he had smiled, and that the feeling was slightly foreign, like rediscovering a muscle you had forgotten you had. Papa's awake, Clara announced from the other bed, apparently having been observing this exchange with sisterly interest. Her color was better too, still pale, still tired, but the glassy, unfocused quality was gone from her eyes. She was present. She was paying attention. She was in every way that mattered back. I can see that, Evelyn said, without looking away from Samuel and the water cup. Nathaniel stood up from the chair, every joint protesting loudly after 3 days and a night of barely moving. He crossed to Samuel's bed and looked down at his son, who looked up at him with those clear dark eyes that were so much like Mary's. It sometimes stopped his breath. Hey buddy, Papa, she won't give me biscuits. Good morning to you too, son. I want the ones with the brown sugar. Nathaniel looked at Evelyn. She looked at him. And something passed between them, quick, almost nothing, but there a shared private understanding that contained something like warmth and something like humor and something considerably more complicated that neither of them addressed. Later, Nathaniel told Samuel, "Water first, Miss Evelyn's right." Samuel received this verdict with dramatic resignation, accepting the cup from Evelyn with an air of suffering that suggested he felt the injustice of the world keenly. Nathaniel looked at his children, both of them awake, both of them present. Samuel complaining about biscuits and Clara, watching everything with her characteristic careful attention, and felt something crack open in his chest, in the best possible way. He had to look away. He pressed his hand briefly against his eyes, and then turned toward the window and stood there for a moment with his back to the room, just breathing. He heard Evelyn say quietly to the children, "Give your father a minute." He was grateful for that. When he turned back, Evelyn was standing by the door to the hallway, giving him space without leaving the room entirely. She had put her coat back on. The small basket, refilled with her things, sat near the door. The sight of the basket beside the door stopped him. She was preparing to leave. Of course she was. She had done what she came to do. She had been here through the whole night and into the morning, had sat with his children through the worst of it, had stayed longer than anyone could have asked or expected. It was reasonable that she would go now. It was completely reasonable. Nathaniel did not know why the sight of that basket by the door hit him with a disproportionate weight. He cleared his throat. "Clara needs to keep drinking," Evelyn was saying. "She'll probably sleep again in an hour or two. Don't worry about that. Sleep is what they both need most now. Samuel can try a little broth this afternoon. Nothing heavy." She paused. "Dr. Hargrove should be told. They've turned the corner. He'll want to check on them in the next few days." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "I'll send word. If either of them spikes again, if the fever comes back hard, don't wait. Send for me. I'll come back immediately." The offer landed quietly in the room. She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without embellishment, as if it were simply a practical matter of logistics. As if walking through a storm at midnight were something she would do again without hesitation, because she had already done it once, and that established it as a thing she was willing to do. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. "Why did you come?" he asked. The question came out before he'd decided to ask it. He had been thinking it since midnight, since the moment he had opened the door and found her standing in the rain, but he hadn't intended to say it out loud. It was too direct. It pushed against the polite distance that existed between neighbors, especially between two people who had barely exchanged more than a handful of words over 4 years. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She looked at the basket on the floor. Then she looked back at him. "I saw your light on for 3 nights," she said. "I told you that. You could have seen a lot of people's lights on for 3 nights and not walked through a storm to help them." Another silence, a longer one. "No," she said finally. And then very quietly, "I couldn't have." She picked up the basket. She said a brief, kind goodbye to each of the children. Clara received it with a smile. Samuel received it with a final doomed appeal for biscuits, and then she walked to the front door, and Nathaniel followed her. She stepped out onto the porch. The morning was clear after the storm. The kind of clean-washed clarity that only exists after a long, hard rain, when everything in the world looks like it has been made new. The air had a coolness to it that would be gone by noon, but was right now something close to perfect. Evelyn stood on the top step and looked out across the valley for a moment, her property visible from here, the smoke starting to rise from her own farmhouse chimney, which meant her fire had been banked and was coming back to life on its own. She had left her house last night in a hurry. Nathaniel realized she had left her house last night, her fire, her animals, her own morning tasks to come here. She had simply set down everything that was hers and come. He stood in the doorway. He was a man who had built his whole identity around self-sufficiency, around needing nothing and no one that he hadn't earned through his own 2 hands. 2 years of raising children alone had reinforced every instinct he already had toward keeping his burdens internal, his struggles private, his needs invisible. He did not ask for help. He did not know how to accept it gracefully when it was offered. He did not know what to do with the feeling that was sitting in his chest right now, complicated and unfamiliar and too large to ignore. "Evelyn," he said. She looked back at him. "Stay for breakfast." He said it plainly. He meant it plainly. It was not an elaborate invitation. It did not carry more than what it said, or at least that was what he told himself. It was a simple thing, a man with a stove, and enough flour for biscuits, and a son who had specific opinions about brown sugar asking a woman who had spent the night watching over his children to sit at his table before she went back to her own empty house. She looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly longer than was strictly comfortable. Then she looked back out at the valley. "My animals need feeding," she said. "I know. I've been away from the farm all night." "I know that too. It'll only take me an hour," she said. To go back and see to things, he waited. "I could come back," she said. "After," Nathaniel nodded. "I'll have the biscuits ready." She went down the porch steps without another word, crossed the yard, and walked across the field between their properties with the same efficient, unhurried stride she brought to everything. He watched her go. He stood on the porch for a long moment after she disappeared, feeling the morning air on his face, listening to the sounds of his farm waking up around him, the chickens, the horses, the ordinary beautiful sounds of a world that was still continuing. Then he went inside to make biscuits. When she came back an hour later, exactly as she'd said, the farmhouse smelled like warm bread and coffee. Nathaniel had changed his shirt and run a hand through his hair, which were small things, but felt important in a way he chose not to examine. Samuel was awake and vertical, which he had achieved by arguing his way out of bed on the grounds that he felt perfectly fine and was being treated like an invalid. A position he maintained loudly until Nathaniel installed him on the settee near the kitchen with a blanket and strict instructions not to move. Clara was asleep again, as Evelyn had predicted she would be, and the sound of her even quiet breathing coming from the bedroom was the best sound Nathaniel had heard in a week. Evelyn knocked twice and let herself in when he called. She looked around the kitchen with an expression that was composed and unreadable in the way she usually was in public, but something in the set of her shoulders was different from how she had been at other times he had seen her in town. Less guarded, maybe, or guarded in a different way. "Sit down," Nathaniel said. "Coffee's ready, thank you." She sat at the kitchen table. Samuel regarded her from the settee with the particular calculating interest of a child who has decided he likes someone and is now assessing what advantages this might provide. "Are you going to be here now?" Samuel asked. Evelyn looked at him. "For breakfast, yes. What about after breakfast?" "Samuel," Nathaniel said, "I'm just asking. You're interrogating." I don't know what that is. It means mind your manners. Samuel appeared to consider this. Then he looked at Evelyn again with bright, uncomplicated eyes. I like you, he announced. You stayed all night. Papa only cries when something really matters. The kitchen went very quiet. Nathaniel turned toward the stove and occupied himself thoroughly with the biscuits. Did he? Evelyn said. It came out carefully neutral, but Nathaniel, who had his back to her and was therefore free from having to compose his face, heard the thing underneath it. The softness. The thing she kept so well contained that it only showed in the space around her words rather than in the words themselves. Yeah, Samuel said, with the serene confidence of a 6-year-old who has no idea what he's just dropped into the conversation. He doesn't cry much, but last night he did. I heard him. A pause. Is that okay to tell you that? Another silence. Yes, Evelyn said. It's okay. Good. I didn't want it to make him embarrassed. Another pause. Papa, is it making you embarrassed? Eat your biscuit, Nathaniel said. He set the plate on the table and then set a smaller one on the end table beside Samuel's settee, because Samuel was not yet getting up, regardless of his opinions on the matter. And then he sat across from Evelyn at the kitchen table and poured 2 cups of coffee, and tried to remember the last time he had sat across from another adult at this table and had coffee. He could not remember. 2 years was a long time. They ate mostly in silence, which should have been awkward and somehow was not. Evelyn ate neatly, without excess, with the same composure she brought to everything. She drank her coffee black. She looked out the window toward the yard, occasionally, and once toward the bedroom door, checking the instinct still running, even now that the crisis was past. He found himself watching her hands. They were capable hands, work roughened in the way that all hands were out here, but precise in their movements, deliberate, nothing wasted. He remembered those hands moving over his children in the dark, checking pulses, adjusting cloths, working with quiet competence through the hours when he had not known what to do with his own. Can I ask you something? He said. She looked at him. You can ask. The things you knew last night, the treatments. You said your mother taught you. Yes. Where did you grow up? She was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet before she said things that cost her something to say. He had already learned this about her, in the space of one night, that her silences were not emptiness. They were processing. They were the time it took for her to decide how much truth to give. Missouri first, she said, then further west.
My father moved us several times when I was young. A pause.
My mother was the kind of woman who made herself useful everywhere she landed. She didn't wait to be asked. She just went where she was needed and did what was needed, and didn't make a production of it. You're like her, Nathaniel said. Something moved across Evelyn's face. Quick and complicated I try to be, she said, and then after a beat she died 11 years ago. The winter of 71. I'm sorry, she was a good woman. She said it simply, without performance. The best I've known. A silence settled between them that was not uncomfortable. Nathaniel turned his coffee cup in his hands. My wife was like that, he said. Mary, she had this quality of just knowing when someone needed something. Before they knew themselves, he paused. Clara has it too. She gets it from her mother. He hadn't intended to say that. He had a careful practice of not talking about Mary to people outside his immediate circle, not because the grief wasn't real, but because it was too real, too personal, too much his own. He didn't take it out and show it to neighbors or acquaintances. He kept it internal the way he kept most things, but the words had come out on their own. Evelyn did not react with the pitying discomfort that the subject of his wife usually provoked in people, the visible awkwardness, the searching for the right thing to say, the pivot towards something easier. She just looked at him steadily and said, "She sounds like someone worth missing." She was, Nathaniel said. Samuel had fallen asleep on the settee, biscuits still in hand, the way children fall asleep when they are recovering suddenly and completely. 1 minute awake and opinionated, and the next simply gone. The house was quiet. How long have you been alone? Evelyn asked. 2 years, since May of 80, and before that. Before that I had Mary. He said it plainly. She made the rest of it, all of it, make sense. Evelyn nodded slowly. She looked at her coffee cup. "I've been alone for 7 years," she said. The words came out measured, deliberate, like she had not said them out loud in a long time and was feeling out their weight. "I came out here to, I don't know, get past something, I suppose. Put some distance between myself and things that hurt." Did it work? She looked up at him. "Some days," she said honestly. "Other days, the distance just feels like a different kind of lonely." The admission sat in the room between them. Neither of them moved to address it, or diminish it, or wrap it in anything more comfortable. It was just there, true and acknowledged, and there was a particular relief in that, in not pretending, in not performing equanimity you didn't quite feel. Nathaniel looked at her. There was a woman sitting across his kitchen table who had walked through a storm in the dark to save his children, and who was now telling him that she was lonely, and who had a way of being present in a room that made the room feel different than it did when she wasn't in it. And he did not know what to do with any of that yet. He was too tired, and too recently terrified, and too cautious a man by nature to do anything quick or careless with it. But he knew that he did not want her to leave. That much was clear. "You don't have to be a stranger here," he said, careful with the words. "You've been over here 12 hours. The farm survived. The world didn't end." He paused. "You could come back sometime. For dinner. Or just to come back. Clara and Samuel would want that." "Would they?" she said, neutral. But her eyes were not neutral. "They would," he said. "And then so would I." She looked at him for a long moment across the breakfast table, the morning light coming in through the window, his son asleep with a biscuit in his hand 3 feet away, his daughter breathing steadily and safely from the next room. Something shifted in Evelyn Marlowe's face, not dramatically. Not the kind of shift that anyone who hadn't been watching carefully would have even noticed. But Nathaniel had been watching carefully. He saw it. The wall not coming down, not all at once, not that simply, but something in it giving slightly. A crack in the careful architecture of distance she had built around herself over 7 years. Small, almost nothing. "But they're all right," she said. She said it quietly, looking at the table rather than at him. And then she looked up, and there was something in her expression that he thought might be the beginning of something tentative and real, and still too uncertain to name. "All right," she said again, "I'll come back," and she did. She came back 3 days later with a jar of something she said would help the children's strength return. She came back the week after that because Clara had asked her a question about a plant in the yard, and Evelyn had said she needed to see it to answer properly. She came back the week after that because Nathaniel had asked her to. Because that was how it started, not with a declaration. Not with a moment anyone could point to and say that was when everything changed. It started the way the most important things start. Quietly, practically, in the small ordinary spaces of daily life. A jar left on the porch, a question answered, a cup of coffee at a kitchen table while a boy slept with a biscuit in his hand. And slowly, the boundary between 2 lonely people and 2 lonely farms began to mean something different than it had before. Cedar Hollow noticed. Of course Cedar Hollow noticed. Small valley communities have a highly developed sensory system for anything that deviates from established patterns, and Evelyn Marlowe's established pattern had been solitary independence for 4 years, which made her new habit of appearing at the Brooks property a source of considerable interest. The first person to say anything directly was Margaret Hale, who ran the dry goods store in town and who had appointed herself, through a combination of genuine warmth and spectacular nosiness, the unofficial keeper of social information in Cedar Hollow. She caught Nathaniel on a Tuesday morning in August when he came in for supplies, and she said, with the particular brightness of a woman who had been waiting to say a thing for some time, "I hear Evelyn Marlowe spent the night at your place during the storm." Nathaniel set his list on the counter. "She helped with my children when they were sick," he said. "They could have died. She came and she helped." Margaret's expression shifted from arch to something more genuine. "Oh, Nathaniel, I didn't know it was that serious." "It was that serious. Is she? The children are well now, both of them?" "Both of them, because of her." Margaret was quiet for a moment, recalibrating. Then she said more carefully, "She's a strange woman. Evelyn keeps to herself so much. People don't always know what to make of her." "People don't always put in the work to know what to make of a person," Nathaniel said. His voice was even. He was not angry at Margaret specifically. She was not a malicious woman, just an incurious one, and there was a difference. "She sat with my children through the night when they were burning with fever, and I was out of options. I know exactly what to make of her." He picked up his supplies, paid, and left. But he thought about the conversation afterward. He thought about how Cedar Hollow had been watching Evelyn for 4 years through the lens of what she wasn't social, wasn't friendly, wasn't open, without considering what she was. And what she was, as he had discovered in one extraordinary night, was someone who showed up. Someone who walked into the difficult spaces that other people stepped around. Someone whose care was not theatrical but was, he had come to understand, enormous, lived in action rather than expression. He also thought about something else. Something that had been growing in the back of his mind for weeks, sharpening with every visit she made, every hour she sat at his kitchen table, every time Clara ran to the door when she heard Evelyn's step on the porch. He thought about the fact that he was falling in love with her. He did not say it out loud. He did not say it to himself with any great drama. He just knew it, the way you eventually know true things, without being able to pinpoint the exact moment the knowing arrived. It had arrived gradually and then suddenly, and now it sat in his chest with a weight that was not unpleasant but was very significant. What he did not know yet was what to do with it. Because Evelyn Marlowe was a woman who had spent 7 years building careful walls, and he had watched enough to understand that she had not built them without reason. And the last thing he wanted to do was push at those walls in a way that undid the fragile and beautiful thing that had been quietly building between them. So he said nothing. He let her come back. He let Samuel attach himself to her with the single-minded affection of a 6-year-old who had decided a person was good and therefore theirs. He let Clara ask her questions and absorb her answers with the thoughtful intensity that was so particularly Clara. He sat across from her at his kitchen table and drank coffee and talked about things he had not talked about with another adult in 2 years, and he said nothing about the weight in his chest, and he waited. But September came, and with September came 2 things that changed everything. The first was a letter. It arrived for Evelyn on a Wednesday from somewhere back east Missouri, from the postmark. Nathaniel knew about it only because he happened to be in town the day it arrived, and he happened to see her face when Martha at the post office handed it to her, and he saw something cross Evelyn's expression that he had not seen there before. Fear, not her usual careful composure, not even the guarded anxiety of someone receiving uncertain news. This was something older and deeper, recognition maybe. The face of someone seeing a thing they had walked a long way to escape, walking toward them across the distance. She left town immediately without speaking to anyone. She did not come to the Brooks farm that week, or the next. The second thing that came with September arrived in the form of a man. He rode into Cedar Hollow on a gray stallion on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of the month, and he was asking questions about a woman named Evelyn Marlowe. His name was Gerald Whitmore. Nathaniel heard it first from Tom Briggs, who ran the livery stable on the east end of Cedar Hollow, and who had a gift for absorbing information the way dry ground absorbs rain completely and immediately. Tom found Nathaniel outside the feed store on Wednesday morning, and relayed the entire encounter with the breathless efficiency of a man who understood that news had value only while it was still fresh. "Fella rode in yesterday afternoon," Tom said, keeping his voice low despite the fact that the nearest person was 20 yards away. "Well dressed, not from around here, you can tell. The kind of dress that costs money and wants you to know it. Gray horse, good saddle. Asked me straight out if I knew a woman named Evelyn Marlowe. Had she been in Cedar Hollow long? Did she live alone?" Nathaniel went still. "What did you tell him?" "Told him I didn't make it my business to discuss other folks' arrangements with strangers." Tom paused, with the satisfaction of a man who had given the right answer and knew it. He didn't like that much. Smiled like he was used to getting what he asked for and wasn't quite sure what to do when he didn't. "Where is he now?" "Got a room at Hester's boarding house." Said he was planning to stay a while. Tom looked at Nathaniel with a directness that was more than casual curiosity. You know anything about this, Nathaniel? About who he might be to her? Nathaniel looked down the main street of Cedar Hollow, past the dry goods store and the post office and the church at the far end, toward nothing in particular. No, he said, I don't, but he thought about her face in the post office. The way she had looked at that envelope, the recognition in her eyes that had looked so much like fear. He thought about 7 years alone and a farm bought at the edge of a valley far from anywhere she had been before. He thought she came here to get away from something. And he thought it followed her. He rode to her farm that afternoon. He did not send word first. He did not deliberate over whether it was his place. He simply rode across the field between their properties, the same field she had walked through in the storm 2 months ago, and knocked on her door. She answered it almost immediately, which told him she had heard him coming. She was dressed for work, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she looked at him with an expression that was composed in the way a thing is composed when it is being held together by effort. Nathaniel, she said, a man rode into town yesterday, he said. Asking about you. He watched her face. The composure held, but underneath it something shifted the way ice shifts on a river when the temperature changes, not breaking yet, but announcing that it will. Gerald Whitmore, she said, it was not a question. Tom Briggs didn't give him your direction, but he's staying at the boarding house. Says he plans to stay a while. Evelyn said nothing. She looked past Nathaniel's shoulder toward the road, even though the road was not visible from where they stood. It was the look of someone calculating distances. You want to tell me who he is? Nathaniel asked. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might say no. Then she stepped back from the door. Come in, she said. The inside of Evelyn's farmhouse was spare and orderly in the way that her movements were spare and orderly, nothing wasted. Everything purposeful, but not without character. Nathaniel had been inside twice before, briefly, and each time he had the same impression, that this was a house that had been made livable by sheer determination rather than ease. By a woman who had decided that comfort was something she could build for herself without anyone's help. She did not sit down. She stood near the window with her arms crossed, not defensively but like someone bracing. Gerald Whitmore is my husband's brother, she said. The sentence landed in the room like a stone into still water. Nathaniel kept his face even. Your husband's. My late husband's, she said it without flinching but also without ease. Thomas Whitmore, he died 8 years ago, 8 years ago. 7 years alone, the math was immediate, and his brother has been. Looking for me, she said, on and off for most of those 7 years. She pressed her lips together briefly. Gerald Whitmore is not a man who accepts that things have ended when they have ended. Thomas left me the property we shared in Missouri. His family disputed it. Gerald disputed it most aggressively. She paused. I held the legal ground for 2 years after Thomas died. And then I left, because winning wasn't worth what staying was costing me. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. What was it costing you? She met his eyes. Everything, she said simply, my peace. My ability to move through my own days without looking over my shoulder. Without bracing, she stopped. He never threatened me physically. I want to be honest about that. He is not that kind of man. But there are other ways to make a person feel unsafe in their own life, and Gerald Whitmore knows all of them. Nathaniel said nothing. He let her talk. He would appear at places I went. Stand at the edge of town socials and watch me without speaking. Send letters that said nothing directly threatening, but made it very clear that he knew where I was and what I was doing and who I was speaking to. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were not. He could see the tension in them, the way her fingers pressed against her own arms. After 2 years of it, I sold the Missouri property for less than it was worth, packed what I could carry, and came west. I chose Cedar Hollow because I didn't know anyone here and no one knew me, and it was far enough. And he found you anyway, Nathaniel said. He always finds me. She said it with a flatness that was worse than anger. That's what the letter was. 3 weeks ago, he had heard through someone that I was in Wyoming. He wrote to tell me he was coming. She had known for 3 weeks. She had come to his kitchen table for 3 weeks, sat across from him, talked to his children, and known for 3 weeks that this was coming, and she had said nothing. He understood why, and understanding why didn't make it easier. "Evelyn," he said, "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. This is my situation." "It's not yours. You sat up through the night with my children," he said. "You told me he started again. Told me in my kitchen that I wasn't carrying it alone that night." "You remember saying that?" She looked at him. "I remember," she said. "Then you understand when I tell you that this is not just your situation." She held his gaze for a long, searching moment. He could see her weighing it, the habit of solitude against something newer and more uncertain. The architecture of 7 years of self-sufficiency against this man standing in her kitchen, telling her she didn't have to do it alone. "He wants the farm," she said finally. "Whatever he says when he comes, and he will come, he'll find the direction eventually. Whatever he says, that's what it's about. He believes I should not have been allowed to keep anything from my marriage, and he has never forgiven me for fighting for it. Even when I walked away from most of it." Her voice dropped slightly. "And he enjoys the pursuit of it. I think that's the truest thing. He enjoys having something to pursue. He won't bother you," Nathaniel said. She shook her head. "You don't know him." "No," Nathaniel agreed. "But I know Cedar Hollow. And I know that a man asking questions about a woman who's lived here 4 years and kept this valley's respect is not going to find many friendly doors." He paused. "Tom Briggs didn't tell him where you were. That wasn't nothing. These people, they don't always know how to show it, but they look after their own." "I'm not sure I'm their own," Evelyn said. "I've never exactly invited that." "You saved a rancher's children in a storm," Nathaniel said. "In this valley, that makes you somebody's." Something moved in her face. She turned toward the window, and he let her have the moment. "I don't want to run again," she said very quietly. To the window, not to him. "I built something here." She stopped. Her voice, when it came back, was rougher. "I finally stopped looking over my shoulder. I finally started." She didn't finish. "You started what?" he asked. She turned back. Her eyes were dry, but the effort of keeping them that way was visible. "Feeling like this might be somewhere I could stay," she said. The kitchen was very quiet. "Then stay," Nathaniel said. Gerald Whitmore arrived at Evelyn's farm on a Thursday morning, 4 days after Nathaniel's visit. Nathaniel knew he was coming because Samuel, who had appointed himself an informal intelligence operation, reported breathlessly at breakfast that a man on a gray horse had been seen on the road that morning heading west, which was the direction of Evelyn's property. Samuel conveyed this intelligence with the gravity of someone who understood it was important, without fully understanding why, and Nathaniel thanked him, told him to stay inside with Clara, and rode out. He arrived at Evelyn's farm to find the gray horse tied at the post outside and voices coming from inside. He could not hear the words, but he could hear the quality of them, one voice measured and reasonable, in the way that things are reasonable when they have been rehearsed, and another voice that was Evelyn's, controlled and cool in that way she had. He knocked. There was a pause inside, then Evelyn's footsteps and the door opened. She looked at him quickly. Something moved in her eyes, not quite relief, but the nearest neighbor to it. "Nathaniel," she said. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice easy. "Thought I'd check on those fence posts we talked about. Didn't realize you had company." It was a simple fiction, and they both knew it, and neither acknowledged it. She stepped back and let him in. Gerald Whitmore was standing in the center of the room. He was perhaps 50, with the kind of build that had once been powerful, and was now softer, dressed well in the way that Tom Briggs had described the quality that announced itself. He had a broad, pleasant face and eyes that were pale and observant, and not at all as warm as the pleasant face suggested. He looked at Nathaniel with immediate, calculating interest. "Gerald," Evelyn said, her voice perfectly level, "this is Nathaniel Brooks." My neighbor Whitmore put out his hand, Mr. Brooks. His grip was firm and slightly longer than necessary. Didn't realize Evelyn had neighbors close enough to drop in. Our properties share a fence line, Nathaniel said. We look out for each other. Something shifted in Whitmore's pale eyes. Reassessment. Well, he said, turning back to Evelyn with a smile that did not quite settle right. Family's family, Evelyn. I've come a long way. I thought we could have a civilized conversation about the outstanding matters between us. There are no outstanding matters, Evelyn said. I told you that in the letter. You told me a great deal in the letter. The smile stayed. In person is different. In person, perhaps we can arrive at something more mutually agreeable. You traveled all the way from Missouri, Nathaniel said, to have a conversation she's already told you she doesn't want to have? Whitmore looked at him again. The pleasantness was still on the surface, but below it was something harder, the look of a man unaccustomed to obstacles and not particularly fond of them. With respect, Mr. Brooks, this is a family matter. Miss Marlowe has made her position clear, Nathaniel said. I don't think the distance she put between herself and Missouri was accidental. She is my brother's widow. She is her own person, Nathaniel said. Simple, final. And she's made her wishes clear. The room held a taut, careful silence. Whitmore looked between them. The pleasantness of his face shifted fractionally, something colder coming through the surface. Something that had been there all along, waiting for the civility to become insufficient. I see, he said. He turned back to Evelyn. His voice dropped and the pleasantness drained out of it. I hoped we could handle this quietly, he said, for Thomas's sake. But if you've decided to complicate things, his eyes moved briefly to Nathaniel and back. There are legal avenues I haven't pursued yet. I've been patient, Evelyn. You know I've been patient. You have been persistent, Evelyn said. That's not the same thing. I could make things very difficult for you here, he said quietly. People in a community like this, they're curious. They respond to information. Certain information about why a woman might have left Missouri in the condition she left it. There it was. Nathaniel felt the shift in the room, the temperature of it changing. Because this was the real instrument, not legal arguments. Not righteous indignation. The thread of story, the thread of a version of events shaped and released into a small community where reputation was currency. He looked at Evelyn. She had gone very still. Her hands were at her sides, perfectly composed. But her jaw was set in a way that told him everything about what it was costing her to stay composed. Get out, Nathaniel said. Whitmore looked at him. Mr. Heard me. His voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't need volume to carry weight. You came here to frighten a woman in her own home. I'm asking you to leave. I'll ask once more before it becomes something other than asking. The two men looked at each other. Whitmore was not, as Evelyn had said, a physical threat. He was a man who operated through pressure and implication and the slow erosion of a person's sense of safety. He was not someone who would throw a punch, and both of them knew it. But what Nathaniel also knew, what Whitmore was reading in his face right now, was that Nathaniel Brooks was not someone operating through implication. He was someone who said what he meant and meant what he said, and the thing in his expression was not a performance. Whitmore picked up his hat. I'll be in town for a few more days, he said pleasantly, pulling the hat down. He looked at Evelyn. Think on what I said. The conversation doesn't have to be unpleasant. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. Quite a friend you've found, Evelyn, he said, not kindly. I hope he understands what he's involved himself in. Then he was gone. The sound of the horse leaving faded across the yard. Nathaniel did not move until it was entirely gone, until the only sounds left were the ordinary ones. Then he turned to Evelyn. She was standing exactly where she had been. Her composure was intact. Her hands were at her sides. She was breathing carefully, with the deliberate control of someone who has had a great deal of practice managing their breathing in difficult moments. Evelyn, he said. I'm all right, she said immediately. I know you are, he said. That's not what I was going to say. She looked at him. What he said about certain information, Nathaniel said carefully. Is there something I should know? Something he could use? She was quiet for a long moment. My husband was not a kind man, she said finally. He was well regarded publicly. Gerald worshipped him. But privately she stopped. I left things out of the story I told you. About Thomas, about why those years were what they were. You don't have to tell me everything, he said. I know I don't. She looked at him with something raw and measuring in her expression. But you just stood in my house and told Gerald Whitmore to leave. You did that without knowing anything. I knew enough. How, she asked, and it wasn't rhetorical, she genuinely wanted to know. How did you know enough? He considered that. I watched you sit with my children for 9 hours, he said. I watched you work through the night, with nothing in it for you. I've sat across from you at that table for 2 months, and he paused, choosing. I've paid attention, and a person who pays attention knows the difference between someone who's running from something they did and someone who's running from something that was done to them. The rawness in her expression deepened. She looked away. Thomas Whitmore controlled everything, she said. Her voice was quiet, and even in the way that voices are quiet, and even when the thing being described is not quiet at all. What I wore, who I spoke to, where I went. He did it carefully, the way people do when they're clever about it, always reasonable, always just the one correction, always somehow my misunderstanding. You spend enough years being corrected, and you stop trusting your own judgment. She stopped. When he died, I found out that the property was legally mine. His family, Gerald especially, was certain I had somehow manipulated that. A woman like me, a brief humorless compression of her mouth. The truth was that Thomas had put it in my name as a form of control. He liked knowing I had something I could only keep if I stayed. He didn't anticipate not being there to hold it over me. Nathaniel said nothing. He waited, so I fought Gerald for 2 years. And I won, and then I sold it anyway because winning was hollow and I needed distance more than I needed to be right. She looked back at him. That's the story he'll tell differently, that I manipulated a dying man. That I took what wasn't mine, that I'm not who I appear to be. He can tell whatever story he likes, Nathaniel said. People believe stories, she said, especially about women who live alone and don't explain themselves. Cedar Hollow has known me 4 years and still finds me strange. A man like Gerald, well-dressed, with a grievance and a brother's memory behind him. I'll go into town, Nathaniel said. She looked at him sharply. Nathaniel, not to confront him, to talk to people, he held her gaze. Tom Briggs didn't tell him your direction. Margaret Hale is a gossip, but she's not a cruel woman, and she already knows you saved my children. Doc Hargrove knows what you did that night, too. He paused. Cedar Hollow may not have known you well, but they know what happened in August. And that counts for something here. She stared at him. You'd do that, she said. Not quite a question. I'd do considerably more than that, he said, and he said it quietly enough that the weight of it was clear without needing to be elaborated. Something broke open in Evelyn Marlowe's face, not the composed surface which remained, but something behind it. Something she had been holding for a very long time. Why, she asked. Her voice came out smaller than usual. Less controlled. Why would you have your children to think about? Your farm, your reputation in this valley. Why would you make Gerald Whitmore's attention your problem? Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Because, he said, I meant what I said when I told you that you were no longer a stranger here. And because he stopped, he was a careful man, he chose his words with care. Because since August, when I think about the people who are mine to look after, your name is on that list. The silence in the room after that sentence was complete. Evelyn looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, open and undefended in a way that was clearly not easy for her. Clearly something she didn't let happen often. Clearly something she was allowing rather than performing. I don't know what to do with that, she said honestly. You don't have to do anything with it right now, he said. I'm just telling you the truth of it, she nodded slowly. She looked at the floor. Then she looked back up, and some of the careful distance had returned to her expression, but it was different now, not the old distance, the wall-building kind. But something more like the distance of a person who is still learning to accept something good without immediately waiting for it to be taken away. Gerald won't go easily, she said. I know, he'll find ways to press. He's patient when he decides to be. So am I, Nathaniel said. She looked at him then, with something that might have been, if you watched it carefully enough, the very beginning of trust. Not the surface kind, the deep kind. That takes a long time to build and doesn't announce itself when it arrives. All right, she said. Nathaniel went to town that afternoon. He was not a man who made speeches or assembled arguments, but he was a man whom people in Cedar Hollow listened to when he chose to speak, because he did it rarely enough that it carried weight when he did. He spoke to Tom Briggs, and to Doc Hargrove, and to Reverend Marsh, and to 3 other men whose opinions moved through the community, the way water moves through stone slowly and completely. He told them what he knew. He told them clearly that Evelyn Marlowe was a woman of integrity, who had helped his family when no one else had, and that a man had come to town with a grievance and a story, and that the story was not true. And that Cedar Hollow would be well served to remember that. He did not tell them everything. He told them enough. By evening, the information had moved through the valley in the way that information moves through small communities completely, and in every direction simultaneously, and by the following morning, Gerald Whitmore had discovered that Cedar Hollow was not a town that was going to find him an interested audience. He tried 3 times. He attempted, carefully and pleasantly, to introduce his version of events at the boarding house dinner table. He found the men there politely uninterested. He tried again at the feed store with similar results. He found Doc Hargrove in the street and attempted the approach of a concerned family member, and Hargrove listened patiently and then said, with the precise directness of a man who had been removing bullets from people's bodies for 30 years and had little patience for anything that wasted time, I know what kind of woman Evelyn Marlowe is, Mr. Whitmore. I've seen it firsthand. I don't think we're going to have much to discuss. Whitmore came to Nathaniel's farm on Saturday. He did not dismount. He sat on the gray horse at the edge of the yard, and Nathaniel came out of the barn and stood and waited. You've been busy, Whitmore said. The pleasantness was entirely gone now. What was left was colder and more honest. I've been talking to my neighbors, Nathaniel said. You've been poisoning a well that wasn't yours to touch. I've been telling people the truth about a woman they didn't know well enough, Nathaniel said. If your well can't survive the truth, that says something about the water. Whitmore looked down at him from the horse with those pale, calculating eyes. You understand that she has never told you the full story, he said. About Thomas, about what she did. She told me her story, Nathaniel said. I believe her, just like that, just like that. Whitmore tilted his head slightly, studying him with an expression that was almost curious. You're in love with her, he said. It was not an accusation. It was simply an observation, made by a man who was good at reading the positions of things. Nathaniel said nothing. She's done this before, Whitmore said. Found someone to stand between herself and the consequences of her choices. You are not the first man who thought she needed protecting. I'm not protecting her, Nathaniel said. She doesn't need protecting. I'm simply standing where I choose to stand. Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly and with a finality that was more unsettling than anger, This isn't over. He turned the horse and rode out. Nathaniel stood in his yard and watched him go. He knew Whitmore was right about one thing. This was not a man who disappeared because he was inconvenienced. This was a man who recalibrated and returned, and the calm deliberateness of his departure was more worrying than a slammed door would have been. He went inside. Samuel was at the table doing the arithmetic homework that Clara was making him do, a domestic power arrangement that had developed naturally over the summer and that Nathaniel had decided not to interfere with. Clara was reading by the window a book Evelyn had lent her. He looked at his children, safe and ordinary and blessedly boring in this moment, and felt the familiar weight of everything that he was responsible for. Then he thought about Evelyn on the other side of the field, alone in her farmhouse, waiting to hear what had happened. He pulled on his coat. I'll be back before supper, he told Clara. She looked up from her book with the particular look she had knowing, too old for 8, and nodded once. Say hello to Miss Evelyn, she said. He went. The field between the two farms was turning with the shift of the season, the ground harder, the air carrying a different quality. He crossed it without hurrying, the way he crossed it now every few days, as naturally as if the path had always been there. He knocked on her door. She opened it, and he saw in her face that she had been waiting not anxiously, but with the focused stillness of someone who has learned to wait well. "He's gone for now," Nathaniel said. She nodded, but not gone. "No," he said honestly, "not gone." She stepped back from the door. He came in. She put the kettle on, because that was what she did when she was thinking, and he sat at her kitchen table because that felt completely natural now, as natural as sitting at his own. They sat in silence for a while, which was also natural. Neither of them was a person who filled silence with noise. Then Evelyn set a cup in front of him and sat across from him and looked at him with that direct, undecorated look she had. "What he said," she began, "when he came here, about you not knowing what you'd involved yourself in. I heard him. He wasn't wrong about that part," she said. "I should tell you there are things I haven't said. About Thomas, about what those years actually were. Not because I was hiding them from you, but because," she paused. "I've spent 7 years not saying them out loud, to anyone. And I'm not certain I know how." Nathaniel curled his hands around the cup and looked at her steadily. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The evening light was changing in the room, going gold, and it caught the side of her face. Then she began to talk, and everything that came after all of it began in that moment. With her voice and his silence and the particular courage it takes to tell the truth to someone you're beginning to love, when love is still the most frightening word you know. She talked for a long time, not in the way that people talk when they have rehearsed a thing, not with clean transitions or careful pacing, or the shape of a story that has been told before. She talked the way people talk when they have been silent for too long, and the silence has finally become heavier than the words. In fragments sometimes, in long careful stretches and then sudden stops. In the voice of someone who is not sure even as they speak whether what they are doing is safe. Nathaniel did not move. He held his cup and he listened, and he did not interrupt, and he did not offer the kind of interjections that people offer when they are more concerned with appearing sympathetic than with actually hearing what is being said. He simply listened. Thomas Whitmore had been, on the surface, everything a woman in 1874 Missouri was supposed to want. Established, respected, older by 12 years, which was not unusual, which was in fact considered a sign of stability. He had courted Evelyn with a focused attention that she had mistaken, being 23 and inexperienced in the specific grammar of that kind of attention, for devotion. She understood now that it had been something else entirely. "He didn't raise his hand," she said. She said it the way people say the thing they know they have to say first, to forestall the simpler version of the story. "I want to be clear about that. He never touched me in anger." "Not once." "I know there are other ways," Nathaniel said quietly. She looked at him. Something in his face told her he meant it not as politeness, not as the right thing to say, but as something he actually understood. "Yes," she said, "there are. Thomas' methods were architectural. He built a life around Evelyn that was, from the outside, a good life, comfortable, respectable, orderly. From the inside, it was a structure with no exits she had built herself. Every decision she made was subject to review. Every friendship she formed was quietly assessed, and the ones that gave her too much of something Thomas could not monitor were managed away, not through confrontation, but through the patient accumulation of small discouragements. A comment here, a preference expressed there, a reason why this particular woman was perhaps not the best influence, this particular activity perhaps not suited to her temperament. After 4 years, Evelyn's world was Thomas's world. She had not noticed it happening. That was the thing she still found hardest to forgive herself for. "You don't stop trusting your own eyes all at once," she said. "It happens in small steps, and at each step there's a reason that makes sense. And you take the next step because the last one made sense, and you don't realize until you're looking back that each step made sense only according to a logic that wasn't yours to begin with." "You were 23, Nathaniel said. I was old enough to know better, she said flatly. You were young enough to be deceived by someone who had been practicing for a long time, he said. That's not the same as not knowing better. That's not a failure of intelligence. She looked at him. Thomas picked women specifically, she said. He had a type, not in appearance, in character, women who were capable and self-sufficient and had opinions. He liked that. At first he liked being the one who convinced a woman like that to defer to him. It was the achievement that interested him. She paused, choosing the bending. The word sat in the room. Nathaniel said nothing, but something in his expression changed, something tightened briefly, and then was controlled. When he died, Evelyn said, the first thing I felt was relief. Not grief, relief. She said it plainly, without apology, but not without cost. He could see the cost of saying it plainly in the set of her jaw. I have spent 8 years deciding whether to feel ashamed of that. And she looked at him. No, she said, I've decided no. The quiet that followed was a different kind of quiet than the silences they usually kept. This one had weight and texture. It was the quiet of a room after something true has been said in it. Gerald Whitmore was devoted to his brother, Evelyn continued. Whatever Thomas was in private, publicly he was exceptional at being admired. Gerald saw only that version. When Thomas died and I didn't perform the grief that Gerald expected, she paused. He decided the explanation was that I had never truly loved Thomas. And from that decision, everything else followed. The suspicion about the property. The pursuit. She pressed her fingertips briefly against the table. I think part of him genuinely believes his own story now. That I am what he has decided I am. People do that. They build a story about a person, and then they stop being able to see the person anymore. He's not going to stop, Nathaniel said. Not a question. No, she said, not based on discomfort, not based on being unwelcome. She looked at her hands. The only thing that has ever made him pause is when the situation changes enough that pursuing me stops being advantageous to him. What would change the situation? Nathaniel asked. She was quiet for a moment. If there were nothing to gain, she said carefully. If the property, the Wyoming farm, were no longer mine alone. If my circumstances were different enough that the legal avenues he keeps implying lost their traction. She looked up. He has never had a legitimate claim, but a woman alone is easier to pressure than a woman who is not alone. The sentence settled in the room between them. Nathaniel looked at her across the table. She was looking at the surface of her cup, not at him, and he understood that she was not suggesting anything. She was explaining a problem, not proposing a solution, and she would have been mortified to be heard as proposing a solution. But the sentence was there, and the implication of it was there, and he was a man who paid attention. He said nothing about it yet. What he said to you, Nathaniel said instead, about certain information. About things he could tell people here. What is that? He'll say I was faithless, she said, still looking at the cup. He has a letter or claims to. From someone in Missouri willing to say that Thomas was not the only man in my life during the marriage. She paused. It isn't true. But it is the kind of thing that cannot be entirely disproved, and in a community like this, a question raised is nearly as damaging as an answer given. He'd use a false accusation. He would use whatever's available. She said it without heat. She had been past anger at Gerald Whitmore for some time. What remained was something more exhausted and more complicated. I've stopped being surprised by what people are willing to use. Nathaniel set down his cup. He came here to pressure you into signing something, he said. Or selling something, or conceding something. What specifically? There is a small piece of the Missouri property I retained. Very small, 20 acres, a timber stand. It has value mostly in what it borders, which is land Gerald wants to develop. He has wanted it for 3 years. She paused. It is the last thing I have from that life that is worth anything. I kept it because she stopped. Because it's yours, Nathaniel said. She looked up. Because it's mine, she agreed. Because I fought for it, and I won, and I refused to give him the satisfaction of taking everything. Her voice was very level. And because I knew that the day I signed it over was the day he would know he could break me. And I made a decision 8 years ago that I would not be broken. Nathaniel looked at her. This woman who had walked through a storm to knock on a stranger's door. Who had sat up through the night with his children. Who had built a farm from nothing in a valley where nobody knew her name. Who had fought a legal battle for 2 years against a family with resources and connections and won it, and then walked away from most of what she'd won on her own terms, not theirs. He had thought in those first weeks after August that he was learning who Evelyn Marlowe was. He understood now that what he had seen was the surface of it, and the depth went down further than he had guessed. "All right," he said. She looked at him warily. "All right, what?" "I need to say something," he said, "and I need you to hear it as what it is and not as what it might seem like given the circumstances." "Can you do that?" She studied him. "I can try." He looked at her directly, the way he looked at things when he was being completely honest. "I have been in love with you since sometime in September," he said. "I don't know the exact day. It wasn't one day, it was a series of ordinary moments that added up to something I couldn't ignore anymore. I have been sitting on it because I did not want to push at something before it was ready, and because you've given me enough signals that you are not a woman who responds well to being rushed, and I respect that." He paused. "That is the context. It is not the reason for what I'm about to say. I want to be very clear that those are two separate things." Evelyn had gone very still across the table. "I want to marry you," he said. "I have wanted that for a while, and I would want it whether Gerald Whitmore existed or not. Whether he had ever ridden into Cedar Hollow or not. It has nothing to do with him or what he could do or what it would solve." He held her gaze. "I'm telling you now instead of later because later has a way of becoming too late, and I would rather say a true thing at the wrong time than keep it to myself until the moment seems more convenient." The kitchen was absolutely silent. Evelyn did not move. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face, not composure, not the careful architecture of distance, but something stripped of all of that, something entirely unguarded, which on her face was more significant than most people's most dramatic moments. "That is," she said finally, "a great deal to say." "I know. At the end of a conversation that was already a great deal." "I know that too." She looked at the table. She looked at the window. She looked at her hands. She was, he could see, genuinely processing, not stalling, not performing uncertainty, but actually moving through something complicated at a speed that was her own. "I am not an easy woman," she said finally. "I've noticed," he said. "I find I prefer it." Something moved across her face that was almost the beginning of a smile. She suppressed it, but not completely. "I have habits," she said. "From those years, ways of managing things, ways of," she paused, "holding myself apart from situations that feel uncertain. I don't always know when I'm doing it. I have been told it is frustrating." "You've been doing it since August," he said. "I've been finding it extremely frustrating, yes." This time the almost smile became a real one, brief and involuntary, and it transformed her face in a way that hit him somewhere in the chest with considerable force. "Nathaniel," she said, "Evelyn, She stopped. "I need time. Not because the answer is no, but because I have not trusted a thing quickly in 8 years, and I am not capable of starting now, not even for you. Not even for something She stopped again. "Something you what?" he asked quietly. She looked at him. The unguarded expression was still there, barely held. "Something I want," she said, very quietly, "something I did not expect to want again." He nodded. He did not push. "Take the time you need," he said. "I'll be here. Gerald is still in town," she said. "Yes, he'll try again. Let him try," Nathaniel said. "I meant what I said to him in your house, and I meant what I just told you. Those two things don't depend on each other." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something he had not expected. She reached across the table and placed her hand briefly over his, just for a moment, just long enough to be deliberate, and then she pulled it back and looked away. It was the most unguarded thing he had ever seen her do. He rode home in the dark feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, it was too complicated for happiness. But something adjacent to it, something like possibility. Gerald Whitmore made his next move on Monday. He did not go to Evelyn's farm this time. He went to the schoolhouse, which was where Clara and Samuel spent their weekdays, and he was standing outside when the children came out in the afternoon. Clara saw him first. She was 8 years old, and she had her father's instincts and her mother's perception, which was a formidable combination. She looked at the man standing by the road with his hat in his hands and his pale eyes and his pleasant rehearsed expression, and she felt something wrong about him, the way animals feel weather before it arrives. She put herself between the stranger and Samuel, without thinking about it. "Who are you?" she asked, directly with her chin up in the voice she used when she was nervous but refusing to show it. "My name is Gerald Whitmore," he said. He bent slightly, the way adults bend when they are trying to seem less threatening, and have not quite understood that this specific gesture does not work. "Your father and I have a mutual acquaintance, Miss Marlowe." "I know Miss Evelyn," Clara said. "Yes, I thought you might." "She's your neighbor, isn't she? A good friend of your father's?" The pale eyes moved over Clara with that assessing quality that she could not have named but registered as wrong in her body. "Your father speaks highly of her, I imagine. Why are you talking to us?" Clara asked. "You should talk to our father if you want to talk about Miss Evelyn." Something flickered behind the pleasant expression. "Adjustment. You're a very direct young lady," he said. "My father says directness is respectful," she said. "It means you're treating people like they deserve the truth." A pause. "Perhaps you could tell me," he said, and his voice shifted slightly lower, more confidential. The voice adults use when they are asking children to be complicit in something. "Has Miss Marlowe been spending a great deal of time at your farm? She and your father, are they close?" Clara looked at him. She was 8 years old, but she understood with the complete and devastating clarity that children sometimes have exactly what this man was doing. He was looking for something to use. He was asking a child to give him something he could use against people she loved. "Sir," she said, "I think you should leave us alone." She took Samuel's hand and walked him away. She did not look back. She told Nathaniel at dinner. She told him plainly and in sequence, the way she told things, what the man had said, what she had said, what she had understood. She watched her father's face while she talked, and she saw something move across it that was different from his ordinary expressions. When she finished, the table was quiet. "You did well," Nathaniel said. His voice was controlled. "You did exactly right." "He was trying to get me to say something about you and Miss Evelyn," Clara said. "Yes, I didn't. I know you didn't, Papa." She looked at him with those two old eyes. "Who is he?" Nathaniel looked at his daughter for a moment. "He's someone who is going to go home soon," he said. "Is he going to hurt Miss Evelyn?" The question landed flat and direct on the table between them. Nathaniel looked at his daughter, then at Samuel, who was watching him with wide, serious eyes over his fork. "No," he said, "he's not." He said it the way he said things when he meant them completely. After dinner, after the children were in bed, he sat at the kitchen table alone for a long time. What Whitmore had done approaching the children was a line crossed. It was a message, and the message was clear: I will use whatever is available. I will not observe the ordinary limits of decency. I will reach into your life and touch the parts of it that are softest. Nathaniel was not an angry man by nature. He was steady and patient, and he chose his battles with care because he understood that not every battle needed to be fought the way it presented itself. But sitting at his table in the quiet of the evening, he felt something that was not quite anger, but was made of the same material, a hard, clear certainty that this had to end, and that he was the one who was going to end it. He rode into town the next morning before the day's work started. He found Gerald Whitmore at Hester's boarding house at breakfast. Whitmore looked up when Nathaniel came through the door, and something shifted briefly in his pale eyes, the calculation running, assessing, deciding on the approach, and then the pleasant expression settled back into place. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "join me." "No," Nathaniel said. He stood at the end of the table. He kept his voice as low enough that the other two boarders eating at the far end had to strain to hear, which meant they would strain. "I'm going to say this once. You approached my children yesterday." "I was merely you approached my children," Nathaniel repeated, and something in his tone killed the interruption. They are 8 and 6 years old. You ask them questions about their father and their father's private life. And I am telling you now, with complete clarity, that if you go near my children again for any reason, what happens next will not be a conversation." Whitmore set down his fork. "Is that a threat, Mr. Brooks?" "It's a fact," Nathaniel said. "I've been reasonable with you because Evelyn asked me to be, and because I believe in treating people the way they present themselves until they give me reason to do otherwise." He looked at Whitmore with the full weight of what he was feeling, which was considerable. "You just gave me reason. She's made you feel very responsible for her," Whitmore said, and his voice carried a knowing quality that was designed to land a specific way. "That's what she does. She finds men who want to protect her and she—" "Stop," Nathaniel said. The word was quiet. Whitmore stopped. "You are talking about a woman whose character you are not qualified to describe," Nathaniel said. "You have spent 7 years pursuing her because she refused to be diminished by your family, and because you cannot tolerate that. That's the whole of it. And you can dress it up in legal language and family obligation and whatever story you need to tell yourself, but the truth of it is simple, and we both know what it is." Whitmore's pleasant expression had left entirely now. What was underneath was colder, and more honest, and somehow less frightening than the pleasantness had been. "You're going to marry her," he said. "Not a question." Not said with surprise. Said with the recognition of a man who has just understood the position of the board. Nathaniel said nothing. "That's the play," Whitmore said. "She explained the situation to you. Marrying her changes her legal standing. Removes the leverage." He tilted his head, very practical. "Go home, Mr. Whitmore," Nathaniel said. "It won't change what people know about her," Whitmore said. "It won't change what happened in Missouri. Nothing happened in Missouri that she's ashamed of," Nathaniel said. "And this community knows her. Your story will find no purchase here. You've been here 10 days. She's been here 4 years. He looked at the man steadily. "Go home. There's nothing for you in Cedar Hollow." Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork and looked back down at his plate, which was a dismissal and a retreat simultaneously, and Nathaniel recognized both. He left the boarding house. He stood in the street in the morning air and exhaled slowly. He rode to Evelyn's farm. She opened the door when she heard him coming, which meant she had been listening for him, which was itself a form of admission that he did not point out. "What happened?" she asked. "I spoke to Whitmore," he said. "I told him to go home." She studied him. "What exactly did you say to him?" "The truth," he said, "that this community knows you. That he has no purchase here, that if he goes near my children again the conversation ends." Something moved in her face. "He went near your children." He told her about Clara. He watched Evelyn's expression as he talked, saw it go through something complicated and tight, and then arrive at something that was not quite anger and not quite anguish, but was its own thing made of both. "Clara handled herself like a grown woman," he said. "I want you to know that." Evelyn pressed her fingers briefly against her mouth. Then she dropped her hand and looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said. "That he brought it to your children. That is, I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for him," he said. "His choices are not yours." She looked at him. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes." She took a breath, and it was the breath of someone who has been deciding something and has now decided it. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said." At this table Saturday evening, he waited. "I told you I needed time," she said. "That is true, I meant it." She held his gaze. "But I also told you I hope I told you that the answer was not no." "You told me," he said. "What I didn't tell you," she said, carefully, "is that every morning since August, the first thing I have thought when I wake up is she stopped. Looked away briefly, looked back, is whether you and your children are all right. Whether Clara slept well, whether Samuel's cough from last week has cleared." She paused. "I have been doing that without noticing I was doing it for months. And I only noticed because Whitmore's letter came, and the first fear I felt before any fear for myself was about what his being here might mean for you." Nathaniel said nothing. He was very still. "I don't." She stopped. "I am not good at this," she said. "I want you to know that." I have spent a long time unlearning the ability to say what I feel because saying it was not safe. I am going to be slow. I am going to seem distant when I am not trying to be. I am going to need more patience than you may feel is reasonable. I have a great deal of patience, he said. I know. She looked at him. That's one of the reasons this is possible. The word possible sat in the room between them. It was not yes, and it was not everything, and it was not the resolution of anything. Gerald Whitmore was still in town. The situation was still unresolved. 7 years of careful walls were not going to come down in a Saturday evening conversation and a Monday morning at Hester's boarding house. But it was possible, and Nathaniel Brooks, who had spent 2 years believing that the shape of his life was fixed and set and known, stood in Evelyn Marlowe's kitchen on a Tuesday in September with his hat in his hands and understood that the shape of things could change. That a storm could break and a door could open, and the rest of it, all the difficult, complicated, beautiful rest of it, could begin exactly there. In the ordinary space of a morning, in the word possible. Spoken by a woman who had spent 8 years afraid to hope, allowing herself finally to say the word out loud. Gerald Whitmore did not leave Cedar Hollow on Tuesday. He did not leave on Wednesday either. Nathaniel had expected the man to begin making arrangements. After their conversation at the boarding house, had expected the gray horse to appear on the road heading east within a day or two. The way a man leaves when the ground has been fully cut from under him. But Wednesday came and went, and Thursday morning Tom Briggs confirmed that Whitmore was still at Hester's, still eating his meals there, still occasionally walking the main street of town with that pleasant, unreachable expression on his face. Waiting, Nathaniel did not like the waiting. He understood it, understood that Whitmore was a man who did not concede a position until he had exhausted every angle, and that leaving before he had found an angle that worked was not something this particular kind of man did easily. But understanding it did not make it comfortable to live alongside. And what made it less comfortable still was knowing that Evelyn was sitting alone on the other side of the field, aware of every hour the gray horse remained tied outside Hester's boarding house. He went to her on Thursday evening. She was in the kitchen when he arrived, which was where she always was in the evenings, not in the anxious, pacing way of a person who could not settle, but in the deliberate way of a woman who cooked when she was thinking because it gave her hands something useful to do. She had been doing it the whole time he had known her, and he had come to read it the way he read weather, a reliable indicator of what was happening beneath the surface. She had cooked a great deal in the last 3 days. "He's still there," she said, without turning around when he came in. She had heard his step on the porch, recognized it the way you recognize the particular sound of someone specific in your life. "Yes," he said. "He's looking for something," she said. "He doesn't stay without a reason. There's something he thinks he can still find." "What does he think he can find?" She was quiet for a moment, stirring something on the stove. "Me," she said finally. Afraid enough to sign, she set down the spoon and turned. Her face was composed in that way she had, the way he had learned to look past to find the actual weather underneath. Underneath tonight there was something taut and worn. "He's done this before," she said, "in Missouri. He stayed in the vicinity for nearly 4 months once. Just present, just within my awareness, not doing anything that could be named or addressed. Just there, until I felt like the walls of my own life were narrowing." "And did they?" Nathaniel asked. "Did they narrow?" She looked at him directly. "I sold the farm and moved to Wyoming," she said. "So yes, you're not going to do that this time," he said. It came out with more certainty than he had intended. Not as a directive, he was not a man who directed Evelyn Marlowe's decisions, and would not have wanted to be, but as something closer to a declaration. A statement of what he believed to be true. She studied him. "How do you know?" she asked. "Because you said possible," he said. "And I don't think you use words carelessly." Something shifted in her face. "Small and significant. No," she agreed, "I don't." He stayed for dinner. They ate at her kitchen table the way they had been eating at one table or another for 2 months. And they talked about the children and the farm and the fence line that needed attention. Before winter, and all the ordinary things that people who are building a life together talk about without always acknowledging that's what they're doing. And then he went home in the dark and lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the farm at night, thinking about what Whitmore was waiting for. He thought he understood it on Friday morning. He was in town for supplies when he saw Whitmore in conversation with two men outside the land office. He did not stop. He continued past, collected his supplies, and made his way back to Tom Briggs with a specific question. "Who owns the land adjacent to Evelyn's property on the south side?" he asked. Tom thought about it. Caldwell family had it, old Martin Caldwell. But Martin died back in spring, and his son, he lives back east somewhere, doesn't want the land. Been trying to sell it since May, and who has been inquiring about buying it? Tom looked at him. "How did you know?" Tom asked. "Who, Tom?" "Man came in 2 days ago to the land office," Tom said. "Nobody from here, dressed well, spoke to Patterson about available acreage." He paused. "Patterson told me afterward the man was particularly interested in the Caldwell parcel and asked a lot of questions about the property beside it. Specifically about ownership, whether there were any liens, whether the current owner had any dependents." Nathaniel felt the shape of it click into place. Whitmore was not simply waiting, he was building. He intended to purchase the land adjacent to Evelyn's farm. Once he owned it, he owned her boundary line, access disputes, water rights, the kind of legal entanglement that a determined, well-resourced man could generate indefinitely against a woman living alone on a farm with no one to stand beside her in a land office or a courthouse. It was elegant in its way, completely legal, completely devastating. He went back to Tom. "How quickly can the Caldwell land be purchased?" he asked. Tom stared at him. "You'd have to move fast," Patterson said. The man seemed serious. "I'm serious too," Nathaniel said. He was at the land office within the hour. He had savings, not a great deal, but enough. He had built carefully over 6 years, had lived without excess, had put money aside in the discipline of a man who understood that security was what stood between his children and the kind of vulnerability he had watched other families fall into. He had intended those savings for specific things: a better barn eventually, or improvements to the irrigation that would make the dry summers more manageable. He told Patterson what he wanted. Patterson, who was a thorough man, walked him through the details of the Caldwell parcel, the price the son had set, the timeline. And then Patterson said, carefully, because he was also a man who paid attention, "There's been another interested party, Mr. Brooks. I want you to know that." "I know," Nathaniel said. "That's why I'm here today and not next week." Patterson looked at him for a moment. Then he opened the relevant file. The paperwork took 2 hours. Nathaniel signed what needed to be signed and arranged what needed to be arranged, and when he walked out of the land office into the afternoon, the Caldwell parcel was his. All 43 acres of it, sitting directly against Evelyn's south fence line. He rode to her farm. She was in the yard when he arrived, and she could read something in his face before he got off the horse, because she stopped what she was doing and looked at him with the focused attention she brought to things that required it. "What happened?" she said. He told her about Whitmore and the land office. He told her plainly, without softening it, because she did not want things softened. He watched her face as he talked, watched her understand what Whitmore had intended, watched the comprehension of it move through her, and then he told her what he had done. She was very still when he finished. "You bought the Caldwell land," she said. "Today. Within the last 2 hours." She looked at him for a long moment. "That was your savings," she said. "Some of it, Nathaniel." "It's mine to spend as I choose," he said, "and I chose to spend it so that Gerald Whitmore cannot park himself on your boundary line and make your life impossible for the next 5 years. He met her eyes. "I'd have spent twice that." She pressed her lips together. He could see her working through it, the independence of her, the part that had survived 8 years, by accepting help from no one, doing the complicated work of receiving this particular thing from this particular person. "You didn't ask me," she said. "No," he said, "I didn't. I knew what he was doing, and I had a window to stop it," and he paused. "If that was wrong, tell me." She was quiet for a full 30 seconds. It wasn't wrong, she said finally. Her voice was quieter than usual. It was she stopped. Nobody has ever done something like that for me. Something that cost them something, without asking what they'd get in return. I know what I'd like in return, he said. I told you Saturday. That's not a condition. It's just a truth that exists separately. She looked at him with those clear, direct eyes. I know, she said. That's what makes it. She stopped again. She had a habit of stopping at the edges of sentences that were too large for the ordinary container of words, and he had come to recognize it as the place where she felt most. He waited. Gerald is going to find out, she said, pulling herself back to practical ground. Probably by tomorrow morning, Nathaniel agreed. Patterson runs a discreet office, but this is Cedar Hollow. He'll know you blocked him deliberately. Yes. What do you think he'll do? Nathaniel considered. I think he'll leave, he said. Not immediately. He'll stay a few more days because leaving immediately is conceding too visibly, and he's not the man who concedes visibly. But he has no angle left. The community won't receive his story. The land he wanted is gone, and he knows. Nathaniel paused. He's clever enough to know that I am not going to get tired and stop. Evelyn looked at him steadily. Are you sure about that? She asked. It could go on a long time. I've been running a cattle ranch in Wyoming since I was 31 years old, he said. I know how to do long. Something broke loose in her then. It was not dramatic. It was not the kind of breaking that announces itself. It was the small, quiet fracture of a woman who has been braced for a very long time, finally letting one specific muscle unclench. She looked away from him, toward the yard, and her jaw moved briefly in the way it moved when she was keeping her face controlled, and then she looked back. I need to tell you something, she said. All right. I made a decision this morning, she said, before you came. Before I knew any of this, she held his gaze. I decided that whatever Gerald did next, I wasn't leaving. I decided it without knowing how it would resolve. I decided I was staying in Cedar Hollow and I was keeping this farm and I was going to. She paused. Stop building the walls and start building something else instead. The yard was very quiet. What changed? He asked. She looked at him. You said possible, she said simply, echoing his word back to him. And I realized that I had not let myself say that word about my own life in 8 years. And it seemed like a significant thing to throw away. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Evelyn, will you marry me? Not with elaborate preamble, not on one knee, not with any of the performance that the question sometimes came wrapped in. Just the question, plain and direct, between two people who had said enough true things to each other that ceremony would have felt like a costume. She looked at him. Yes, she said, just that, just yes, said the way she said true things without decoration, without hedging, with her eyes on his and nothing in her face but the fact of it. He exhaled. He had not realized how much he had been holding until he let it go. Gerald Whitmore found out about the Caldwell land on Saturday morning. Nathaniel knew this because Whitmore appeared at his farm at 10 o'clock with a controlled expression that was doing considerable work to remain controlled. And he stood at the yard's edge and looked at Nathaniel with those pale, assessing eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then he said the Caldwell parcel. Yes, Nathaniel said. You moved quickly, I did. Whitmore looked past him toward the farmhouse for a moment. Then back. You understand, this doesn't resolve the Missouri question, he said. There is no Missouri question, Nathaniel said. There is a 20-acre timber stand that belongs to Evelyn, and has always belonged to Evelyn, and will continue to belong to her. There is no question. Legally, she has clear title and has had it since 1876, Nathaniel said. I spoke to a lawyer in Cheyenne last week. He had done this by telegraph, which had cost him $3 and had been worth every cent. His assessment was that you have no viable claim and that pursuing one would cost you significantly more than the land is worth. He paused. I thought you should know that. Whitmore looked at him for a long time. You've been thorough, he said. I've had a good reason to be, Nathaniel said. A pause. She told you about Thomas, Whitmore said. It was not quite a question. She told me what she chose to tell me, Nathaniel said. And I believed her. That's the end of that part of it. Something moved through Whitmore's expression, not defeat exactly, because this was not a man who arrived at defeat simply or without resentment. But recognition, the recognition of a position that had become untenable. She found herself a protector, he said. She found herself a partner, Nathaniel said, and the correction was quiet and final. There's a difference. She doesn't need protecting. She's been managing her own life for 8 years without any help from me or anyone else. What she has now is someone who stands beside her. That's not the same thing. Whitmore was quiet. You're going to marry her, he said. Yes, Nathaniel said, we are. Another long silence. And then Gerald Whitmore did something Nathaniel had not expected. He looked at the ground briefly, and when he looked back up, something in his face had shifted, not warmly, not with any kind of genuine reconsidering, but with the particular look of a man who has been telling himself a story for a very long time and has just run out of the energy required to sustain it. My brother was not, he began, then stopped. Nathaniel waited. He told the family she was difficult, Whitmore said. Willful. That she required management. He said the word with a flatness that might have been the beginning of understanding, or might have been nothing. I believed him. He was my brother. I know, Nathaniel said. I still believe he. Whitmore stopped again. He pressed his lips together. She was not easy for him. I imagine she wasn't, Nathaniel said. I imagine refusing to be made smaller is not easy for anyone who wants to make you smaller. Whitmore looked at him, and then he put his hat on. I'll be leaving Monday, he said. He turned and walked to the gray horse and mounted and rode out without looking back. Nathaniel stood in his yard and watched the road until it was empty. He stood there for a while longer after that, because he was a man who needed time to let large things settle before he moved on from them, and what had just happened was large. Not triumphant, it did not feel like a victory, exactly, because the whole of it was too sad for clean victory. A woman had spent 8 years running from a story built around her by people who had never been willing to see her clearly. That was not a thing to feel triumphant about, even when it ended. But it had ended. He rode to Evelyn's farm at noon. She knew the moment she saw his face. She was on the porch, and she went still when he came through the gate, reading him with that precise attention she had, and he watched the information arrive in her eyes before he said a word. He's leaving Monday, Nathaniel said. She sat down on the porch step. Just sat down right there, like the news had taken something out of her knees. It was one of the least composed things he had ever seen her do, and it was therefore one of the most honest. He sat beside her. They sat on the step together without speaking for a while, and the world around them did what the world does, continued, ordinary and unaware, the sounds of the farm and the distance and the sky happening the way they always happened. Is it over? She said finally. Her voice was very quiet. The Missouri 20 acres is yours, clean and legal. I have it in writing from Cheyenne. He paused. The Caldwell land is mine, and it will stay mine until there's a reason to change the arrangement. Another pause, smaller. I thought maybe after the wedding it could just become ours. If you wanted. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry, but the edges of them were not. You bought land next to mine, she said, to protect my boundary. And now you're offering to make it a wedding gift. I'm offering to make it ours, he said. There's a difference. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, but was some honest thing in between. I don't know what to do with you, she said. You don't have to do anything with me, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She leaned then. It was the smallest movement she leaned, and her shoulder came to rest against his, and she did not pull back. She sat there with her shoulder against his on the porch step, and neither of them said anything for a while, and it was the most natural thing either of them had felt in a very long time. Clara and Samuel took the news with characteristic contrast. Samuel, informed at dinner on Sunday that Miss Evelyn was going to marry their father and come to live on their farm, received this information with the immediate and practical focus of a 6-year-old and said, Does that mean she'll make breakfast sometimes? Sometimes, yes, Nathaniel said. Because her biscuits are better than yours, Samuel said with the serene honesty that was his particular gift. Clara said. It's true, Samuel said. Papa's biscuits are a little flat. Miss Evelyn's are. He made a gesture that communicated transcendence. I'll tell her you said so, Nathaniel said dryly. Clara, who had been quiet through this exchange in the way she was quiet when she was feeling something too large for casual expression, looked at her father across the table with her mother's eyes. Are you happy, Papa? She asked. The table went quiet. Nathaniel looked at his daughter, 8 years old, too perceptive for her age, carrying the particular gravity of a child who had lost her mother young and understood, in the wordless way children understand things. That happiness was not something to be taken for granted.
Yes, he said simply.
Completely I am. Clara nodded slowly. Something released in her face, tension he hadn't fully registered, was there until it left. Good, she said. Me too. They were married in November. It was not a large wedding. Evelyn had not wanted large and Nathaniel had not needed it. Reverend Marsh performed the ceremony in the small church at the end of Cedar Hollow's Main Street, and the people present were the people who had earned their place there, Tom Briggs and his wife, Doc Hargrove. Margaret Hale, who wept visibly and made no apology for it, a handful of neighboring families who had been part of the fabric of Nathaniel's years in this valley. Clara stood beside Evelyn. Samuel stood beside his father. Wearing a collar that he found unreasonably confining, and had said so 3 times before the ceremony began, and then submitted to with the resignation of someone who has lost a vote, but maintained his position for the record. Evelyn wore a dress the color of winter wheat, and she had done something with her hair that was different from the usual, and when she walked in, Nathaniel forgot briefly how to do anything other than look at her. She walked to him with the direct, unhurried stride she brought to everything she did. She stood beside him. She looked at him the way she always looked at him when she was not trying to be composed clearly, honestly, with everything she actually felt visible in her eyes, rather than managed to the surface of her expression. Reverend Marsh spoke, and when it came to the vows, Nathaniel said his with the same plainness he brought to true things. No performance, no ornamentation, just the words and what he meant by them. Evelyn said hers quietly, in that voice he had first heard through the rain on his porch 4 months ago, and there was not a single person in that small church who could not hear every word. When Marsh pronounced them married, Samuel said audibly, finally, which produced a ripple of laughter through the gathered people, and Clara put her face briefly against Evelyn's arm in the contained, deliberate way she had learned from her mother and had given, since August, only to Evelyn. Evelyn's hand came up and rested on Clara's hair. That was the moment Nathaniel would remember when he thought about that day. Not the vows, not the ceremony, not the moment Marsh said the words. He would remember Evelyn's hand on his daughter's hair, and the way Clara leaned into it with the trust of a child who has decided that this person is hers. Gerald Whitmore had left on Monday as he said he would. He rode out of Cedar Hollow on the gray horse before most of the town was awake, which was, Nathaniel thought, its own kind of acknowledgement the departure of a man who did not want to be watched leaving. He did not contact them again after that, not directly. There was one letter in December, addressed to Evelyn, from a Missouri law firm, and it contained a formal withdrawal of any outstanding claims regarding the timber stand property. Evelyn read it at the kitchen table, folded it carefully, and set it in the box where she kept important papers. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "It's done." Nathaniel nodded. She looked up at him. "It's actually done." "Yes," he said. She pressed her hand flat against the table and exhaled through her nose, slow and complete, the breath of someone putting down something they have been carrying. So long they forgot they were carrying it. "All right," she said. Then she got up and started making dinner, because that was what she did, and because life continued, and because the kitchen was warm and the children were somewhere in the house making the ordinary noise of children who were safe and fed and known. And because some things, the best things, do not end with a dramatic moment. They end with the return of ordinary life, which is, if you have spent long enough without it, the most extraordinary thing there is. The winter that year was hard in the way Wyoming winters are hard, complete, and without apology, settling over the valley with the permanence of something that knows it belongs there. The two farms became one operation by the natural logic of people who were no longer spending their energy on the elaborate maintenance of distance. Fences were moved or taken down. Routines merged. The farmhouse that had once felt too quiet expanded to hold the sound of a family that had added itself to itself. Evelyn was not a woman who became someone new because she had married. She remained precisely who she had always been, capable and direct and privately deep, with the specific humor that revealed itself only to people who were paying close attention, with the reserves of knowledge and competence that she had spent years building alone. What changed was not who she was, but the context in which she was it. She was no longer alone with herself. She was herself within a family, which is a different thing entirely. Clara attached herself to Evelyn with the careful, measuring trust that was Clara's particular way of loving slowly and then completely. She brought Evelyn her questions, which were many, and Evelyn answered them with the same seriousness she brought to everything, which Clara responded to better than she responded to anything else. Within 3 months, Clara was following Evelyn around the farm the way she had once followed her mother, learning things Nathaniel could not have taught her, asking things she would not have asked anyone else. Nathaniel saw it happen and said nothing. He did not point it out or make it significant with commentary. He simply watched and was grateful. Samuel's relationship with Evelyn was conducted primarily through food and debate. He had strong opinions about meals and expressed them freely and without embarrassment, and Evelyn received these opinions with the grave respect she gave to all things that mattered to the person saying them, which Samuel recognized as his due, and which therefore cemented his devotion completely. He also argued with her about nearly everything which she engaged with at full capacity, which he found deeply satisfying. By December he had taken to announcing, periodically and without context, that he reckoned she was the smartest person he knew. "What about your father?" Evelyn asked the first time. "Papa is smart about different things," Samuel said thoughtfully. "You are smart about all the things." Nathaniel, who was within hearing of this conversation, chose to study the ceiling at some length. Spring came the way it always came after a hard Wyoming winter, with a suddenness that felt like an argument won. The ground softened. The fields that had been solid and unyielding since November accepted the work of plowing again, and the two farms that were now one operation expanded their planting for the season, because there were more hands and more intention and more reasons to build for the future. In March, Evelyn discovered she was expecting. She told Nathaniel on a Tuesday evening in the kitchen, standing at the stove, the way she always stood when she was gathering her courage through the work of her hands, and she said it plainly because she did not have another mode. She watched his face while she said it. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put his arms around her from behind and pressed his face into her hair, and did not say anything for a long time. "Nathaniel," she said finally, "you're going to have to let go eventually." "I'm trying to cook. In a minute," he said. She let him have the minute. She stood there with her hands still on the stove and his arms around her, and the kitchen warm and smelling like the dinner they were making. And she thought about the woman she had been a year ago, the woman who had walked through a storm with a basket of herbs and no certainty of anything, and she could not entirely connect that woman to this moment. Not because the distance was too great, but because the distance was exactly right. She had walked exactly this far, and it had brought her here. Samuel was ecstatic about the baby in the broad, uncomplicated way he was ecstatic about things, immediately developing opinions about names and asserting that it should be a boy, followed almost immediately by reversing his position and deciding a girl would be acceptable, because then he would have leverage over 2 younger siblings rather than 1. Clara received the news with the particular quiet joy of a child who had been thinking about these things longer than anyone knew. She came to Evelyn the evening after she was told and stood in front of her and said, with the precision she brought to important things, "I've been thinking about this baby all winter. I didn't know that was what I was doing, but I think I was." Evelyn looked at her. "I think sometimes we hope for things before we know what we're hoping for," Evelyn said. Clara nodded seriously. "That's what I thought." She paused. "I'm going to help, I know you are," Evelyn said. I'm going to be very good at it, Clara said. I know that too, Evelyn said. You're already very good at most things you decide to do. Clara absorbed this with the composure of a child receiving a truth she had quietly suspected but needed to hear confirmed. And then she went back to whatever she had been doing before, with the satisfied air of someone who has completed important business. The baby came in October, 2 years almost to the month after Evelyn had knocked on Nathaniel's door in a storm. A girl small and decisive from the first hour, who announced her arrival with a conviction that made Samuel, informed of this from the yard where he had been waiting with the focused anxiety of someone who understands stakes, say, good. She's got opinions. We need more people in this house with opinions. They named her Margaret. Clara held her first, sitting very straight in the chair beside the bed, holding the baby with the focused and solemn care of someone who understands that they are holding something important. She looks like nobody, Samuel said, peering over Clara's shoulder. She looks like herself, Clara said. She's only been alive for an hour. She hasn't had time to look like anyone yet. She's got Papa's nose, Samuel decided. She does not have my nose, Nathaniel said. She definitely has your nose, Evelyn said. People in Cedar Hollow talked about the Brooks family the way small communities talk about the stories that make sense of themselves, with the particular warmth of people who were there, who saw it unfold, who understand that what happened in that valley was not just a private thing, but a belonging thing. This is what we are thing. They talked about the night of the storm still. About the fever, and the woman who had walked across the field in the dark with a basket. About the father who had opened the door when he was out of hope. They talked about Gerald Whitmore and his pale eyes and his gray horse and the way Cedar Hollow had simply closed around Evelyn like water closing around a stone, making clear without drama or declaration that she was theirs and that he was not welcome. They talked about the wedding, and the children standing beside their parents, and Samuel's audible commentary. But the thing they returned to most often, the image that had attached itself to the story of the Brooks family, the way certain images do, was this: a farmhouse light burning through a stormy night. And a woman who saw it and did not look away. That was the whole of it, if you needed to make it simple. A light in a window that said someone was in trouble, and a person who chose to walk toward it, rather than draw her curtains and wait for morning. Everything else, the family, the farm, the children growing up, and the baby learning her name, and the years moving forward in the way that years do when they are filled with good things, all of that grew from that single decision. That single movement toward someone else's light. Nathaniel knew this. He thought about it sometimes on winter evenings when the farmhouse was full of noise and warmth, and the kind of ordinary chaos that only exists when a life has truly filled itself back up. He thought about the man he had been on that particular night, the broken open, run-out, down-to-nothing version of himself, pressing his forehead against a doorframe in the dark. And he thought about the knock, 3 quiet taps, patient, unhurried, as if she had known, in the way that certain people know things, that she was supposed to be there. That the storm and the light and the door and the man behind it were not coincidental, but were, in the deepest sense he knew how to reach for, exactly right. He had asked her once later what had made her get up that night. What had moved her off her own farm in a storm in the dark to knock on a neighbor's door. She had thought about it for a while. "I've been alone a long time," she said finally. "Long enough to know what a light that doesn't go out means. Long enough to know that pride is a very poor reason to let someone suffer alone when you might be able to help." She paused. "And I suppose," she said, quieter, "I was tired of being on the wrong side of that. I had been warm and dry and separate for a very long time. And that night I looked at that light, and I thought I could cross that field. I could just cross that field and knock on that door, and be useful to someone who needed it. And afterward, whatever happened, I would have done that. I would have been someone who did that." He had looked at her for a long moment after she said it. "Thank you," he said, "for crossing the field." She had looked at him with that clear, honest, utterly undecorated look she had. "Thank you," she said, "for opening the door." That was the story of Cedar Hollow's quietest family. A father who opened the door when he had nothing left. a woman who walked through the dark to knock on it. 2 children who recovered from a fever and grew up knowing what it looked like when someone decided that another person's life was worth crossing a field for. And a family that was built, in the truest sense, from exactly that. From the willingness to move towards someone else's light instead of away from it. From the particular courage of crossing a field in the dark and raising your hand to knock. From the understanding that the most important things in a life are not the ones you build alone, but the ones you find the courage to build together. That understanding did not arrive with noise. It never does. It arrived on a stormy night in Wyoming with 3 quiet taps on a wooden door, and it never left.